let's talk about economic numbers a little bit in the United States. Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, has become under increasingly tougher rhetoric from the White House. And today, Scott Bessent was being interviewed and basically said Powell is wrong. And he's been wrong since 2022, when the Fed actually didn't fight inflation aggressively enough in 2022, when inflation was known. And now that the economic numbers have been sliding a little bit and they're lackluster in terms of the GDP, and inflation has been eroding, the Fed hasn't been cutting interest rates, while the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, New Zealand, Australia, India even has cut their interest rates. The Fed stays on this path where they keep talking about uncertainty. Now, a couple weeks ago, the GDP numbers came in weaker again than expected, and inflation numbers continue to be lackluster, tame, below the anticipated data. The Fed is still not publicly saying that they're going to cut interest rates at the end of July when they have their FOMC meeting, and it's getting bizarro out there.
Well,
People just don't understand. The dollar is getting weaker because people expect the Fed has to be in a position where they're going to cut interest rates sooner rather than later. But Powell is just dead set against doing this so far.
well, he keeps hitting the pause button. And he said that publicly. He said that they would like to lower rates as many as 3 or 4 times this year, but they have to keep waiting because we don't know what's going on with these tariffs. So every time, I mean, that's the whole taco thing, right? Where every time he says he's going to tariff something, then it pulls back. There's been 10% across the board. We haven't seen that in prices yet across the board. We've seen them in some pockets.
You haven't
but we
seen
haven't
it.
seen them across the board because in a lot of cases, there were companies that worried about it. They bought as much as they could of stuff, and they're still going through that inventory. So,
but there is data technologically that the Fed can get almost instantaneously now, where they can watch inflation and they can watch the export and import numbers, and they can get a very good gauge about what's going on in the economy and be much more nimble. So saying, just like you're doing right now, that they're waiting, they have to sit back and look at all the numbers, that worked 10, 20 years ago. But nowadays, there are these things called computers with live numbers that the Fed can look at. They can be much more nimble. They should have cut, my opinion, the federal funds rate by 50 basis points 3 months ago. And if inflation goes up, they can literally say, look, we need to raise it by 25 basis points. They can do things like that. But instead, they're still working like they're in the land of academics. This is my problem with them. They don't work like they're running a business.
yeah, they've been a little gun shy. I think they just want to keep powder in the cannon. They keep the powder dry. I think that because
But it's
there's
slowing
so
down
much
the American
uncertainty.
economy.
Don't forget, Trump keeps saying, okay, it's going to be this number, this amount of tariffs for all these different countries. So you're like, okay, he held back, and he's like, okay, we're not going to change the rates. We're going to see how that works out. And then in every one of those cases, Trump pulled back and said, okay, we're going to give him another 30-day window or 90-day window or whatever.
Yeah,
now, a
you're
lot
right.
of that comes up on the 9th of July. So Powell's sort of like his hands are tied behind his back. He can't do anything until he knows what these tariffs will be. And then that information is what he can go from. And meanwhile, you have all this inventory that's like pretty much gone through. I think we're going to start seeing some prices go up in the middle of summer. That's what I'm hearing. But the thing is that we just don't know. I mean,
Yeah, but haven't we learned about Trump already in the last 5 months? Not to mention the first term. And even when he's talking about the Iranian-Israel negotiation situation or anything else, that he blusters a lot. He makes great pronouncements, speaks
you
out of
can't-
his ass a little. Let me finish. Speaks out of his ass just a little bit, Okay. But then he puts a little powder on his tush and he says, you know what? I feel better. We've made progress. We're talking. We're going to extend the negotiation for another 30 days. He's going to do it again.
Yeah, but you can't
India,
set
by the way,
exactly.
is
So
on the clock. This is going to be big on July 9th.
Powell can't like that exactly, but you can't set monetary policy based on something that Trump might or might not do, and you just don't know because sometimes
But
he
my
does,
point is
sometimes he
you
doesn't.
can. You actually can
Well,
because you
here,
have
okay,
real data
let's.
that they can read. And then if something bad happens, they're allowed to actually change the interest rate before the meetings.
Right. What if?
There's nothing legally that says you can only change after the FOMC meeting. They're allowed to
No,
change whenever they want.
there isn't. But their job is to
I know
navigate
what their job.
through recessions and through to make sure that the ship is not rocking around too much, right?
But they work
So
too
what
much like
if?
academics. They don't
What
work
if?
like businessmen.
Fine, but what if he's looking at a lot of other criteria and he's saying, I think we might be in a recession. We'll find out in a couple of weeks.
Well, if
I know
he's in a
that
recession, he's
July
supposed to
9th,
cut the interest rate.
right, but what if it makes it,
the
if
point
if he
is it's
cuts
at
it,
4.50.
if he,
If it
exactly,
cuts
but
it,
if he
then,
cuts
then
it
the
and the
interest
recession
rates are
is,
lower.
if he cuts it and the recession is worse because of tariffs or this, that, or the other thing, then all of a sudden he has to raise it again. And meanwhile, you
Yeah.
have a ton of like housing starts and stuff. You need workers for that. There's a whole lot of critical infrastructure that's very precariously balanced right now. And we don't know what the answers are yet. And so I
No
think
one
he's just
knows
been,
what
maybe
the
he's
answers
being overly conservative. Sure. But at the same time, until he has all the answers, and he won't until probably, I think in the next month, we're going to know a lot more information. We'll
are.
have
Well,
a lot
by
of
August the
monetary figures
1st,
from the
we're going to
second
have a lot
quarter.
of information.
We're going to have a lot of information. I think he's just waiting on that, you know, and we'll see. But yeah, I will predict this though. I think next year there's going to be a lot of cuts because I think the economy is going to rise next year. I really do, and I think at that point he wants to be able to play around with it and have.
There are some signs that the economy has been improving the last month or so, actually. Consumer sentiment has improved a little bit. If the Fed had lowered the interest rate, consumers would pay less for their credit card purchases. Mortgages would certainly be a little bit cheaper too. And the
Yep.
price that the US government is spending on paying interest rate yields on treasury notes and bonds would decrease substantially if they lowered the interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think will win the election for mayor in New York City on the 4th of November? As of
I
today,
as of
Giuliani?
today, yeah.
People are going to be
No.
surprised to hear he's running, by the way.
I will say I think Cuomo has a shot at it, and like we were
Wow.
saying earlier, I think
Okay.
he's a very savvy character. He has had a lot more practice than these other two guys. I don't think Adams wins. I think it's going to be between Cuomo
Cuomo?
and this Mamdani
Mamdani.
guy.
All right. And we just discussed whether the Federal Reserve, actually, we didn't. Will the Federal Reserve cut interest rates the end of July, or will they say they're going to cut interest rates starting in September?
I
We've
think they
been
will.
down this road before.
Yeah, I think they're going to cut interest rates at the end of July.
I
I
think
think
they're
it'll
going to
go
cut.
a quarter point to a half point. It could be a half point. It's just going to depend on what this economic data looks like in the next 2 weeks. It's going to come in,
Okay.
and the tariff stuff, which we'll find
I'll
out
go on a
supposedly
limb and I'll say
on the
that,
ninth.
Yeah, it's the deadline is the 9th
Right.
for the tariff outcome. And the question for that is, does it matter? And I think it does. India apparently is fairly worried about what's going to happen. They're negotiating, Canada's negotiating, but India's going to be affected by the outcome. I think Trump will push things back. I think he's going to say, look, we've made great progress and we have a few more weeks to iron out a few details, but everything is basically done. I think that China supposedly has been done too. Although I wonder, Trump keeps mentioning Xi's name as if Xi's in a full leadership mode here. I'm wondering if Xi is going to lose power in August. Am I allowed to say this?
I really don't know. I'm gonna look into it and see if I can read any tea leaves from friends. But I'm just not. The places I'm hearing that are sort of people who have opinions, not like hard
Exactly.
news.
They have an axe to
Yeah,
grind, some of them,
yeah,
certainly.
yeah. A lot of them.
Certainly. I wonder if they're, look, I respect Taiwan. I respect what it does as a nation, okay? But clearly there's political animosity
Yeah,
towards
yeah.
China and Taiwan. But it looks to me like Xi will officially lose his leadership role in August. The Politburo meeting is in August. I haven't gotten my invitation yet, but I've been told it's in the mail and it's late because of the Iranian-Israel situation over
Yeah, they
here.
always have their big meeting in the fall and generally in August, and so if something is afoot, we'll probably find out
Okay.
at that point.
And here's my final question. By August, are we going to have to admit, I have been saying it the last couple months, and so have you in a way, but will people start calling it a bull market in the Nasdaq, S&P, and Dow Jones again? Because we're at record heights again. We've
Um,
actually we
yeah,
cratered to
right,
lows that hadn't been seen in a long time in April of this year.
right.
And 2.5 months later, we're back at record heights.
Yeah, I think the only two things I can think of that would dampen that are if because each time they crashed to lows, it was when all that tariff talk was going on, like Liberation Day and all that other stuff, and that's when everybody
Exactly.
got like a little worried, and then he kept backing off, and so it's sort of like people are sort of forgetting about it, or they baked a lot of the changes into the marketplace already. There's that,
Yeah.
um,
They've
but
gotten
then the
used
other
to it too.
so
They've
and
gotten
that's what I
used
mean.
to
They've
it. All
gotten
the
used to
bluster.
it.
Yeah.
They've gotten used to it. People haven't seen rising prices yet. We don't know if we're in a recession yet or not. I think we might be in a light one. We'll know soon. I think that all of that will factor into whether or not this becomes a bull market. I think it'll be a bull market next year, and there'll be uncertainty for the rest of this year. And then don't forget the big beautiful bill, which adds supposedly $5 trillion to the deficit, which is the last thing we need right now. That'll weigh on certain um, investment as well and
Okay.
investors for long
Okay.
term people. You know.
I have a end of the show saga I would like to share with the audience. And trust me on this. Last night, I pulled off the trifecta of accidents. I was on my sofa drinking a Nescafe. We are sponsored by Nescafe this week, by the way.
I guess we are now.
I spilled my cup. The coffee ran onto the floor. I'm wearing flip flops. I think to myself, all right, go get a rag so I can wash the mess up off the floor. I stand up. I slip backwards because my flip flop is wet on the bottom from the coffee. I fall on my ass.
Hydroplaned.
My arm then swings back, hits the sofa where I had made the coffee mug upright, knocks the coffee mug onto the ceramic floor. The
Mm.
coffee mug breaks. I reach down to gather the coffee mug. I'm sitting in the puddle of coffee, by the way. And as I grab the coffee mug, what do? I cut my hand open. It was like bad slapstick.
So I guess you could safely say that the most dangerous thing in your part of Tel Aviv, Israel, isn't missiles, but it's rather Nescafe coffee. Hmm.
It was wonderful.
And the mugs they're served in.
That is correct.
So here's hoping for less eventful weeks ahead.
I would like my part of the world to be out of the news for the next 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't hear the words Middle East for the next 15 years, I would be a happy person.
The Rest Reward Show is a co-production of Angry Metatraders and Leitmotiv Press. It is produced by Scott Summer and Robert Petrucci and engineered by Scott Summer and Sagi Nizri. Music is by All Good Folks, a group of composers based in London you should definitely check out. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts, as we're everywhere, like the gods we are.